Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 3 of Midnight Snacks. Today, we are going to be covering an iconic 90s teen film, The Craft, as well as its more recent sequel. Is it a sequel? Sequel of.
It's a sequel.
Okay, we'll get there. The Craft Legacy, which, yeah. So we will start off as my co-host. As always, it is Jerry. I'm Alex. We are here to talk The Craft. Jerry, what's going on?
Excited about this week's topic. The Craft is one of my favorite films of the 90s. I went to go see it in theaters. So there's...
You did?
I did. And I loved it. And have loved it ever since. I think I own it on like 3 different versions. So this one's very near and dear to my heart.
That's kind of amazing. I love that you saw it in theaters. I did not. I did not see this movie in theaters. My first kind of touch with this was absolutely rental.
Okay.
I rented it at Blockbuster a lot. It was always at my house, as many films that I had in my kind of wheelhouse in that time of my life were constantly being checked out. I apologize to anyone, as always, who was attempting to rent that film, and I always had it at my house.
That's great.
So
yeah, I didn't own it. I don't think I ever owned it.
Me either. Yeah.
It was definitely like a rental, but once I started collecting movies, I definitely I think I have it on DVD and Blu-ray. So
sweet. So you want to jump into The Craft?
Sure.
All right, let's do it. So The Craft is a cult classic supernatural horror film directed by Andrew Fleming. It's notable for blending teen drama with rich craft, making it a unique entry in the 90s teen movie landscape. Plot synopsis is: a troubled new girl at a Catholic high school befriends 3 teenage outcasts who practice witchcraft, and together they unleash the powers to gain control over their lives, only to discover that magic comes with dangerous and deadly consequences. The all-star cast from the 90s includes Robin Tooney as Sarah, Fairuza Balk as Nancy, Nev Campbell as Bonnie in a pre-Scream role.
Yep.
Rachel True as Rochelle, Skeet Ulrich, also from Scream, as Chris, and Christine Taylor, Marsha Brady herself from the 90s Brady Bunch films, as Laura.
Mrs. Ben Affleck, or Ben Stiller. Sorry, I got my Ben's confused.
Mrs. Ben Affleck, we won't even touch that one.
Yep.
The film, as mentioned, was directed by Andrew Fleming, who is family for us. He's part of our tribe.
Yep.
And it was written by Peter Filardi and Andrew Fleming. Okay, so let's jump into what we thought about The Craft. Go for it, Jerry.
I love witches. I love witch movies. I love their culture. I love their sisterhood. I love that it is about empowering women. And I think that anytime a movie casts 4 women in the lead, sign me up. I mean, this is like a bedrock movie for me, right? Like It came out in 1996, like in the middle of like all these teen movies. But this one stands apart, right? It's like nothing else that was done around that time. And it was just so it was such a vibe. It was such a mood. And I think that they cast it perfectly. I have some thoughts on Robin. She's not my favorite in the movie, but I love Fairuza Balk. She and I go back to Return to Oz, her first movie.
Return to Oz, yep. I knew you were going to mention that.
She is just phenomenal. She's in everything I've ever seen her. She's just so great. And, her and Janine Garofalo were just such a gothic, cool girl vibe in the 90s that I certainly responded to. Along with, Daria on MTV. So it's all kind of the same to me. And putting them in a feature film like this about witches just kind of, it ticks a lot of boxes for me.
Yeah, kind of echoing your point. I think I'm a huge witch stan. I love witches. I've always been into them. Um, and I think The Craft itself is such an iconic film that kind of depicts witches because they were they managed to use their powers in like really kind of personal ways, but then at the same time they used it in these kind of like bigger fantastical kind of methods. And similar to the way it happens in a movie like Practical Magic, it's not all kind of like, rays of light coming out of your fingertips, and kind of it's stuff that feels much more natural, like tangible,
Earthy.
like earthy, and like you
Yep.
could do it. And that's the same way kind of Practical Magic handled its, magical realism sense of how magic is portrayed.
Yeah.
This movie, the cast, phenomenal. Like, they're just so good. I always have a good time every time that I rewatch it. I'm always reminded of how much I wanted to be a part of their group.
Yeah,
How much
absolutely.
how
And
much I
dress
wish.
like them.
Yeah, yeah. Like, I went through a goth phase
Yeah.
in middle school, and I dreamed of kind of dressing like, Manson and The Craft and all that kind of stuff. And I had my own kind of ways of doing it, fishnet shirts, like all black, painted my nails. Unfortunately, I didn't get to like kind of really explore myself that way, the way I would have liked to, but I always lived vicariously through films like The Craft. I always was like, man, why can't I have leather pants, at 13 years old? Fun fact,
That's because you live in Miami, Florida.
fun fact, I actually did get leather pants.
Okay.
And I did wear them to middle school at one point or another.
Brave.
So I definitely had no problem putting myself out there like that.
Okay.
When I needed to.
Yeah.
Do you have any history with The Craft? Like maybe how it maybe you mentioned that you saw it in theaters, so I guess that would be your first kind of history with it.
For sure.
I beyond that, were you friends with any witches growing up?
No.
You weren't.
I wasn't. But I have always been a fan of Stevie Nicks, right? And I think Mother Witch is Stevie Nicks. I've responded to her music. I love her whole vibe. I love what she stands for. But beyond that, right, the 90s was a great time for witch movies. And so it just all kind of folded into itself. I think what makes The Craft stand out beyond all of the other ones was that it wasn't a comedy, right? You weren't supposed to, it wasn't funny. It wasn't making fun of them, or it wasn't that like lightning bolts shooting out at you either. It was handled in a way that I think was respectful of their religion of Wicca and Wiccans. And actually, one of my fun facts is that they hired a real life Wiccan on set to kind of make sure that things were done respectfully and accurately. That person also, I think, wrote the incantations that they use in the film. So, care was taken from the production's point of view to make this a serious movie. And it is a serious movie. And it's about teenagers, but that doesn't mean that what teenagers go through isn't hard and difficult and like needs to be represented. And the bullying that one of them faces, the scars that one of them has, it really takes a toll on her self-esteem. The new girl in town, and then the girl who has a really disturbing home life, who, even if you can't relate to one or many of those things, there's something there for you where like your adversity could be seen through these characters. And I think that really was the pull for me.
Yeah. I agree with all those points, because those are some notes that I had as well. Can you hear her a lot? You can't hear anything? That's great. Okay, good. Because we're having some technical difficulties in my background, and I just want to make sure they're not coming out on the recording. So, something that's going to be a thread for me in a lot of these movies from the 90s is that what defines me a lot is that Gen X kind of 90s energy of independence, resourcefulness, overall skepticism of authority, the kind of soundtracks that come along with the 90s. You know, I got the Alice in Chains shirt. I'm big into the grunge movement and that alt rock movement. Just the entire alt vibe of the 90s was always something that really attracted me. And this movie has it in spades. It's just, it's all over it. I was going to mention it's something as you were talking, it kind of is a bit of a precursor for, the supernatural teen genre that became famous in the later part of the 90s, largely as well connected to the work of Wes Craven and what he did with a lot of his more supernatural movies, maybe like Nightmare on Elm Street, and he had some of that going on. But in the mid 90s, he obviously did Scream. Yeah. And then from there, The Craft also, especially the first season, reminds me so much of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Yeah. Just the tone is very similar. Buffy's on a TV budget, so it's not able to maybe do stuff to the same level. And because it's on broadcast TV, it also can't go as dark, but for the scope of television and teen television at the time, Buffy manages to find ways to go dark. And so this really reminds me a lot of what Buffy was doing in its early days. Yeah. It also reminds me a lot of like the same kind of deep commitment to an edgy goth aesthetic that Alex Proyas did with the Crow movie, down to like the Pitch Perfect soundtrack that, definitely elevates it creates an entire world. The soundtrack, the mood, the story, the performances in the film, all of it just kind of works to make something really special. Yeah.
What I've always thought about the music is that the music to me, the music in the film has always reminded me of music that they would have listened to.
Absolutely.
And so you have this kind of dynamic, right, where you've got these like four really strong individual characters who are all kind of into the same thing. Well, really three, and then Sarah, right? But what you're listening to is what you feel like they would be listening to.
Right.
And I think it just kind of ties the whole world together really beautifully. It's not my kind of music, if I'm being honest, but I can understand and respect it. And it was a phenomenal soundtrack.
And as I was doing a rewatch for our review, something that I quickly noticed was some smart choices that the director, and obviously he was the writer as well, did to kind of, this whole thing with film is sometimes is show, don't tell. And right from the get-go, when you have Sarah and her father moving into the new house, the camera pans to that photo of her mom. And that's a very quick way of signaling to the audience that, the mom isn't around anymore. There's already a certain sense of loss. You start to understand that about her character without them having to tell you that. And it's little choices like that are things that you wouldn't even really pay attention to, but you're absorbing it as what is making this kind of function in a very smart, kind of like well executed way. And there's a few other examples of where they did things like this, and I have them on my notes, and I'll get to them in a second.
Sure.
But here's another example of it, actually. I liked how the director quickly kind of sets up Sarah as an outsider beyond just her being the new girl, because that's obvious. Yeah. Quickly sets her up as being the outsider by being out of uniform at a school that is all uniforms.
Yeah, and Catholic school. It's a Catholic school.
Catholic school. And almost immediately, she obviously catches the eye of all the students, but she immediately catches the eye of the main three witches, who they themselves kind of put their own spin on the uniform. So while everyone else is kind of laid out in this very standard look, she immediately is already blending in more with the three witches than she is with everyone else. And
Yeah.
that's one of those like little smart choices with costuming that immediately kind of just creates a connection to the story that is about to be told.
Yeah. Maybe along the lines of what you're talking about, maybe not, you tell me, but
Sure.
I think what stands out to me is the moments that jar you into suspecting that something's gonna happen. So in that same scene when they're moving in and she's looking through posters and a homeless person walks up to her with a snake, like, you are taken aback, right? Like, that is a moment where you are disturbed by what is happening, right? Girl by herself, strange man at the door, you add a reptile or a snake, and then like it's just a lot of red flags. And things like that happen throughout the movie that are not necessarily scary. They're not jump scares. I wouldn't consider them jump scares, but it kind of keeps you on edge the entire movie because you're just waiting for something like that to kind of pop out at you.
It's creating tension.
It's creating
this tension
Absolutely.
with the story. You're getting a lot of like juxtaposed scenes. Like you're getting like very calm, kind of normal, rational communication between her and her father, and like her moving into this new space, or rather her interacting with, her surroundings. And then all of a sudden it gives you this, a scene that's essentially like tinged in suspense and horror that is meant to create this tension. Like you're like, there's something else going on here that is eventually gonna pop out. We just don't know what it is.
Yeah. And what's her name? Robin plays Sarah. She downplays her a little bit, right? Where like it's very subtle. Her performance is very like low key. And so when things happen to her, it just adds to that tension. It adds to that like hypersensitivity that you as the viewer are experiencing. Yeah. That said, she's not my favorite. She's I hate to say it, but the acting is not great.
My friend Jason used to always poke so much fun at Robin Tooney. He used to be like, "Oh, we used to just like go around saying that they were going to cast Robin Tooney and random things because he thought she was just terrible." And I know Jason did listen to last week's episode, so he's gonna he is one of our listeners, so I know he's gonna hear this.
Yeah, he's not wrong.
Some stuff that like stuck out to me that is just so good. And I mean, I think we're moving our way to talking about Fairuza Balk because she's the standout of the film. But some things that just like immediately stand out to me was, of course, the Bitches of Eastwick line. Come on. A homosexual had to come up with that. Only a gay man would come up with the Bitches of Eastwick.
Absolutely. And it was pitch perfect.
So the shop lady in the magic shop,
Lilo?
As a child, I thought that she was Jane Seymour. Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman. She just looked so much like her. And something that stuck out to me just now watching it was there's so many candles in that store.
Yeah, it was a fire hazard, and it's literally the size of a shoebox.
And how expensive is the store? The $50 for candles and a book was a lot. Like, but immediately I was like, you know what? That used to be that way. Like, did you ever stop into the occult book section inside of Walden Books?
I didn't.
Okay, well, I hung out with witches in middle school. So I was always in the occult section at Walden Books. Okay. And those books were expensive. They had their grimoire and the Book of Spells.
Yep.
And like the Secret Circle and all these other things. And those books were always like $60. And I was like, I want to read this, but I'm not spending $60 on like a witchcraft book. So I would hang out at their house a lot and read their copy.
Well, that reminds me of another famous witch, Bedknobs and Broomsticks, where the kids in that are saying, can you make some money? And she's like, have you ever heard of a rich witch? They don't do that. So I don't know where they're getting the money to maybe it's just passed down from which generation to which generation.
I don't know, but that was just something that stuck out to me. I'm like, man, it's so true. Books for the occult are really expensive.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because it's such a niche market.
Yeah. You lived in LA for a few years, and a lot of
Mhm.
this movie is filmed in LA,
Los
including
Angeles.
the
Yep.
store, an El Escondido or something like that. I read. Have you ever, when you lived there, did you ever see any of the locations?
No, no, I
Okay.
didn't. I
Okay.
mean, I'm sure they were there. I'm sure,
Sure.
you know, obviously they were there. I just didn't make a point of like maybe seeking any of them out.
Fair.
One of the parks actually, while I was watching it, did remind me of Kenneth Hahn, which is where Power Rangers is filmed. And there was like a couple parts where I'm like, that looks a lot like something you would have seen in Kenneth Hahn Park. But I'm not sure if it was because I mean, parks that are full of dirt and rocks are the dime a dozen in
Yeah.
Los Angeles County. So not really sure about that one. I loved the fantastic moody maximalism of the set design.
Yeah.
There's just so much stuff. And that is such a benchmark in witchy aesthetic. You know,
Yeah.
I think I aspire to that level of moody maximalist, witchy aesthetic as a, you know, man. And I don't care about being called a warlock. I could be
Yeah.
a male
Yeah.
witch.
Yeah. You know, that cozy, warm, inviting, well lit
So
kind
well
of
lit.
feel.
Can't
Yeah.
like a something I wrote here was that it's and this is like for a call out for the cinematographer who's Alexander Gruzinski. He gave the whole movie a sun-drenched kind of glow. Like when they're in the daytime, it's sun-drenched, but like there's also like this kind of soft like haze and like this
Yeah.
glow to everyone. And then
Yeah.
the nighttime scenes have like candlelit glow, and it's just it really throws you into it. And I thought you would like this point right here. So Alexander Gruzinski also did the movie 54. 54
Interesting.
with
Okay.
Ryan Phillippe and
Yeah. Yeah.
Nev
Yeah.
Campbell.
Yeah.
I just realized Nev Campbell was also in that.
And Selma Hayek is in that too.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's a great soundtrack. We
Yeah.
should do 54 actually. I would really enjoy that one.
Say no more. Disco Studio 54. I'm there. I think I already have the
Um,
outfit picked out.
so loved Bonnie Nev Campbell, her Take My Scars scene when she's on the when you know when she's doing
Yeah.
the spell to take her scars. And something else that I found that I really liked about that scene, I liked how vulnerable she was being, but I liked how safe she felt among the rest of her friends.
Yeah.
Throughout the movie, she's constantly covered up in public and doesn't want anyone to see her. And in a lot of the scenes with them for the large first half of the film, she's completely covered up still. It's in that specific scene where you see her kind of you finally see her back. She's you know, and all her friends are there, and there was just something really beautiful about
Yeah.
seeing the way that these quote unquote outsiders and whatnot really have like a unity among each other.
And come together for each other. What's interesting about that scene too, and I hadn't picked up on it until I rewatched it in preparation for this, is that Fairuza Balk's character is the one applying an ointment to her in that scene. She's the one in the shot when she is saying that. And for Fairuza Balk's character to go from that nurturing friendship and that part of a coven and that to where she eventually ends up at the end of the film is just, I mean, it runs the gamut, right? Of how far astray she went after, you know, the incantation of Manon and like the beach scene and stuff like that. So, you know, is she the villain? I don't know. I don't know if I would call her the villain, but she certainly goes in a different direction away from her friends by the end of the movie.
Right. And I mean, this is a good segue into kind of getting our thoughts out on Fairuza Balk in the movie, who's essentially the standout, but there's no real clear-cut villain in this film. She definitely is like the antagonist for the later half of the movie in terms of like when you start to create more of like a cut and dry, like good versus evil kind of context.
Right.
But for the first half of the movie, even though she's a bitch, she's cool. Like you know, like she's a bitch to the rest of the world because the rest of the world treats her and her friends
disparagingly.
Like shit.
Sure.
Right.
I would say Skeet Ulrich is probably the villain of the first half.
Absolutely. Because he's like the asshole jock, you know, who is completely using Sarah. So I liked too that before I jump there, I want to make sure we talk a little bit more about Fairuza Balk. Like,
Yeah.
she is the face, kind of most of the time, of the craft.
Yes.
You know, her scenes are the ones where, you know, she really chews up the scenery, really makes use of like the great dialogue, of like the kind of unhinged scenarios that they're placing her into. And it's strange too, because she does such a good job as that crazy person that it almost feels like it's her.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, we know instinctively that Fairuza Balk is not Nancy and she's not crazy, but she plays her so well that you're like, this person has to be
she is unhinged in real life.
Right. Like this person has to be an unhinged witch, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love what Fairuza Balk does in this film. I like the entire cast. I especially love the beach scene, the calling the four corners. Something that stood out to me about that scene was, you're so used to seeing witches in the forest. And what stuck out to me as I was watching it again was, this is right by the ocean, which is kind of, you don't see that often. You don't really see witches doing their spells and incantations there. They're usually either in like a dark cave or you know, a
cottage or forest,
a creaky old Victorian house, all that kind of stuff. So I loved that. And where her character goes also, to me, felt like maybe one of the first times that I can remember seeing this, but it is the analogous for magic use and addiction, and, you know, drug use. That was definitely something that I'm not sure that I had seen before the craft. I'm sure it's out there. I just haven't been exposed to it. If there's anything that, you know, you come across that does that, definitely recommend it to me. But the first touch point that I have for that as well, you know, in my teen years, was watching Buffy. They do that very well in Buffy, where the more magic use you get, the more kind of power hungry you get. And then that starts to make you really want to dip into the darker kind of arts, or the darker kind of forms of the occult.
I've never connected it with addiction. Certainly there is a correlation in the craft between magic and consequences, which is what I think I took away from it, right? Overuse of something will bring consequences, right? And I think Fairuza Balk's character, Nancy, took it to the extreme, and she ended up in an extreme situation. So I think it's a cautionary tale of what a good thing that you are blessed with, and they were all blessed with this skill, right? Whether it was because they were together or they individually had, you know, they don't really get into that, but overuse, right? Basically overextending yourself on something that is a gift, I think, is a cautionary tale.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the movie kind of definitely shows you that it is possible to be a full-time witch and not kind of teeter into madness, you know what I mean? And you are able to be practicing. I think the best example of that in the film that we have is the shopkeeper. It's obvious she's a witch and that she, you know, works in magic, but she hasn't gone off the deep end. So it has a lot to do similar with consequences, abuse of something, like how much you allow something to kind of take you over and dictate which direction you're going to take this power, this gift that you've been given.
Well, and there's a line in the movie, your power comes from within, and I think that witch says something, there's no good or bad, it's just what you do with it. And I think, you know, if we're pitting the two major leads against each other, right, Robin's character and Fairuza's character, those were choices that were made, right? One was in self-defense, and then the other one was just, you know, and I understand Nancy too, right? She's coming from a broken home. She's got a horrible mother. She's got a horrible stepdad. She has no money. She is the kind of person who doesn't fit in easily already. And so I think her want is from a need. So I do understand her character 100%, but I also always think, and I thought it this last time that I saw it too, was more than Nev Campbell's character and Rochelle's character is there's like a little jealousy behind Nancy's
Big
character and
time.
how
Big
she
time.
approaches not only Skeet Ulrich and the attention that he's giving to Robin's character, but also against Robin. And it kind of pits them against each other where Robin doesn't care, right? She just wants friends and she's kind of going with the flow. But Nancy's always one step ahead of that. And I think it's from her jealousy.
Yeah, that stands out to you for sure. The fact that she has this broken home, has this shitty kind of existence back home where, her mom is in potentially abusive, marriage with her stepfather. And I do love the scene, where the stepfather dies from a heart attack and then they're in the ambulance and then they get the money from his insurance.
160,000.
Yeah. That's a good one. So something that I noticed too was I think there's a Wizard of Oz reference.
Okay.
So in the scene when Nancy is attacking Sarah at home at the end, like the whole final scene.
Yeah.
Sarah locks herself up inside of the shower, and then the marks come on her hands and she starts bleeding, and then it goes away and she starts screaming, and Nancy opens the door of the shower and she says, "Oh, just do it already," and turns the water on. And I immediately was like, is that a Wizard of Oz reference? Because the water is what kills the Wicked Witch in
Wizard of Oz.
So I'm like, oh, that's pretty smart. If it's, it's like, oh, she
very
turns
subtle,
the water on, like,
I would say.
Right. It's subtle, but it's just this little thing that if you're not paying attention to it, it means absolutely nothing. But if you look at it and you think of that extra layer, you're like, that's actually kind of cool.
Yeah. Well, I would say, and hearkening back to our Beetlejuice episode, for me, there's always one iconic scene that captures the entire spirit of the film. And for me in this one is Firuza Balk walking on water. That scene.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, forget it, right? Not only the biblical underpinnings of that scene, right, where she's now a god. It was just done so well, and you think back to 1996, like the technology was it holds up. It holds up. So for me, I think that was really a masterstroke of using the character's development and showcasing it in a nonverbal, just what you're looking at is what the story is about.
And the usage of magic in this movie, kind of like, light as a feather, stiff as a board, was a sleepover staple. At any sleepover, any kind of like teenage or, preteen kind of party that I would go to, you were constantly, maybe it was just because I hung out with witches a lot, I don't know, but
probably
light as a feather, stiff as a board was a constant. We used to do the Ouija board. We used to do the whole thing. We were always on board for that. And this movie became a cult classic, and I think it deserves it. I think it really is a time capsule of a very specific time in youth culture and in Hollywood and in music and fashion, while also giving you a really great story of like really strong, empowered teenage girls that are going through a bunch of different hardships and insecurities. And it's just melding it in with this like good versus evil kind of storyline about magic and consequences. Like, it's just, this movie, I can't sing enough praises about it.
Yeah. It's a world that you can relate to in ways that you would not think were possible. And it's a world that you want to revisit time and again, right? At least I do. I probably watch it every year, multiple times, because I love it so much. So I have some fun facts for you.
Oh, go for it. I love your fun facts.
So 2 for this one, because I already gave you the one about the Wiccan advisor. So guess, well, don't guess. I'm going to tell you. 3 actresses that auditioned for this role and didn't get it. Angelina Jolie.
What? Oh.
Scarlett Johansson. Good old ScarJo.
Okay.
Alicia Silverstone, who was in her own cult classic in the 90s. How do you feel about that lineup?
So I knew about the Alicia Silverstone. And to be honest, at first, if someone tells you that, I could see why somebody would be like, no, that doesn't work. But Alicia Silverstone made quite a few movies in the 90s that were serious kind of teen angst movies that are not comedies like Clueless. I think, you know, The Crush. She had this other one where she falls for like this creepy dude and he kind of uses her. I don't remember the name of it right now, but it's a good one.
Yeah.
It's definitely more of like a smaller B movie. I gotta say, Angelina Jolie, she would have been awesome.
Yeah.
Well, wait, but she was supposed to be Sarah?
So the internet didn't tell me what they were supposed to be. They were just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of actresses auditioned for this movie, including these 3, but they didn't say who was supposed to be who. I did read Neve Campbell was not supposed to be Bonnie. She was supposed to be, I think, Sarah's character.
Okay.
And when they found Robin, they're like, this is our Sarah. And so they kind of switched it up a little bit, which I think does a disservice to the movie. But, you know, no one's asking me those questions. So, yeah, so there was a little bit of shuffling around. And Rochelle, is that her name? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, Rochelle, Robin True.
Yeah, she was cast, and so when they cast her, they wrote in some of the racist stuff because they really wanted to capture that as part of her being bullied and stuff like that. So that wasn't part of the original script, but when they cast her, they thought, oh, this is going to be a really solid plot point, and I agree.
I agree there too. Like that was something that I like how each of them have their own very specific life struggle.
Yeah.
That they're dealing with.
And very real, very
real.
Based on stuff that could really happen. And then the last fun fact for you. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. And I think that's what made it feel very realistic. What made it feel very realistic is that these are problems. And I think sometimes nowadays I don't know, but I feel like nowadays they don't like to kind of touch on certain things as much as maybe in the 90s they did.
Watch Heartstopper.
Well, right. No, and like there's you know, I'm talking a little bit more about mainstream Hollywood movies, like movies that get released. I think streaming plays a lot more with kind of bringing true issues that are happening in the world right now, whereas like movies themselves have become more sanitized, whereas like shows are like the place now where you go to get more of that kind of nuance to what's happening in our actual world.
Well, and I think we can table this conversation for a bigger pod, but I think there's a big shift in what is created for teens and for young people now where it's about being famous and not being vulnerable or not being yourself or not being with your friends and not, there's this like, and, social media plays into that and like TikTok and stuff like that, where you just want to go viral for a dance or for, something you say versus how you interact with other people. But anyway,
last fun fact. Let's go.
My last fun fact. So Robin Tunney, I guess is her last name.
We always say Tooney, but we'll go with Tunney.
I'm not a big fan, so it's fine. I have always had a problem with her hair, and like it always looks super fakey, and like nothing looks like that in the rest of the movie, right? And then come to find out, she was bald. It's a wig because she shaved her head for
Empire Records.
Yeah,
Empire Records. Yes. One of my absolute favorite movies.
Yeah.
Have you seen Empire Records?
I have, yeah.
Okay, good. Do you own it?
Not a fan of hers either there.
Do you own it?
I don't think I own it, no.
Oh man. Well, we gotta do an episode of Empire Records for Rex Manning Day.
Okay.
Yeah, we should do that.
Yeah. But anyway, so that's why she looks so fake. Like that, like I don't know what the drag queens call it, but like her hairline is always just so messed up. And I'm like, And when she does that thing where she changes her hair color, I'm like, this is worse. This is like so much worse. But
I'm gonna send this like audio clip over to the hair and makeup person for the original Craft movie and let them know that these were your thoughts on Robin's styling.
I will die on this hill.
Okay, so our final verdict on The Craft is
2 thumbs up.
We love it. We love it. Watch The Craft over and over again, multiple times a year.
Now, strong pivot.
What are we on time wise? I think you're the one I go to for time.
Probably maybe another 20 minutes.
All right, cool. So I think we can hash out what we wanted to for 20 minutes. So we are going to pivot over into The Craft Legacy, which ties in to our first episode, which was requels.
Yep.
Reboot, sequels, legacy sequels, that kind of thing. Neither one of us had seen it. And it is available for streaming only on Stars.
Yeah.
Which is behind a paywall that neither one of us wanted to pay. So I supplied it for us through the other methods.
Through means that need not be mentioned.
Other methods. So I think maybe it would be good for this one for me to kind of come in, because I don't know if you knew that The Craft had a sequel when I mentioned it to you.
Correct.
Right. So I did know that The Craft had a sequel. And that it was released in 2020 during the pandemic, which for sure hurt the movie. The Craft sequel was first announced in 2016, and I do remember that. And it was huge uproar online by fans, and even Fairuza Balk, and that's a nice little hint for later. Fairuza Balk went out publicly and said that she didn't think it should be remade, because I think at the time it was a remake.
Okay.
And she said it shouldn't be remade because it's already so good that, if they wanted to make a sequel, they should get everybody back together and tell something new involving the original cast. And I think that's a pretty good segue into The Craft Legacy.
Yes.
What did you think?
I didn't hate it.
Okay.
I will say a few things. I will say I was cringing for the first solid half of the movie, where I'm just like, maybe I'm old, maybe this is not for me, maybe like the way that kids talk nowadays is just something that
rough.
It
was so rough.
That is just beyond my comprehension. All of those things could be true, but I'm not so out of touch where like it was rough. The girls, the coven themselves, the 3 girls outside of the main girl, were not great. I didn't feel like they would be friends in real life. I didn't feel like they had good chemistry. I think the slapstick one, the jokes were not landing.
That was rough. It was really rough.
It was just like it was very difficult. But what got me through, and I'm a completist, no matter how bad I think something is, I will get to the end so I can have an informed, hate-filled opinion. Mm-hmm. And in this case, I'm glad I stuck with it, because the movie pivots in the middle of the movie.
I think I know where you're going with this. Because as I was watching, because you told me while you were watching it, the movie took a pivot.
Yeah.
And after that was kind of where we ended that conversation. But as I was watching it, I was kind of looking for what I thought the pivot was, and I have a feeling I know.
The pivot was absolutely the scene with the prince from Red, White, and Royal Blue.
Nicholas Galzatine. I butchered it, but Nicholas Galzatine.
His coming out to them in that circle was probably one of the best pieces of acting I've seen him do. It just was so raw. It was so beautiful. It was something that I don't know what I was doing, but I stopped what I was doing and I watched it, and I'm like, this kid has just turned this whole movie around for me. And the girl's reaction to him also, I think, elevated all of them.
Yeah.
And when he says there's no room to be himself, like, no more callers, please. We have a winner.
It's interesting because I knew that that was the scene. I knew that that was the scene. And I think that scene and that storyline kind of stands out in
Yep.
this movie, both in a good and a bad way.
Okay.
In one sense, it's a powerful story that's been introduced into the film. It also detracts from you. It also detracts from the main witches. You know what I mean? Like the story doesn't help you. Or rather, let me find the best way to say this. We don't know enough about these girls in this movie
By this point.
By this point, right? And it's introducing a whole new tortured kind of layered storyline for this character that I think elevates what is there, because what is there is not very good, but that choice detracts from the ability to generate more for the main cast, which is usually like the coven or the main witches. And I struggled with figuring out where I wanted to kind of fall on this. I think at the beginning I was trying to be very generous, and I was also surprised by the way the film looked. I might be a little more gentler than you are here, but I'm not going to be totally nice on it. I expected the movie to look worse going into it.
Okay,
because since it premiered as a Paramount Plus streaming film back in 2020, or actually no, it did not. It went straight to VOD. Actually, you had to buy it.
Yeah.
But because it like went straight to streaming, I assumed that it was a straight to streaming movie. I did not realize that they had an intention to release this in theaters, but the pandemic messed that up. So I will say the fact that it was a more well shot film than something that would have been kind of straight to streaming does show up in the look and feel of the film. That being said, because I said I wasn't going to be super nice on it, the movie has absolutely no style whatsoever. And when the first one is so defined by knowing exactly what it wants to be style wise and really having like clever lighting, incredible kind of like cinematography and shots, and like this, you know, that beach scene from the first movie, if you decided to take a photo or a still of that with, or like the witches in the circle, like, you know, with the fire, you can print that out and somebody would be very happy to see that on their walls. This movie has no kind of iconic framing or just it. So while it doesn't look bad, it doesn't look like anything special. It just looks like another Blumhouse kind of $10 million. We gave this person money to make a horror suspense film, and it just kind of doesn't look bad, but it doesn't look good.
Yeah. Well, two things. I think it reflects the times. I think it's a movie that was made in 2020.
Which is awful.
and you can feel however you feel about it, but you know, the same way that 96 looked like a 96 film, I think this, you know, even the mom's hair being done all kind of nice. I think it's where we are with movies. So I pay less attention and care about that a little less.
Yeah.
Going back to your earlier point about like the kids coming out, taking away from the storyline of the girls, I disagree with that. I think the fact, and spoiler alert, I think the fact that the kid dies immediately after that, it just builds this tension among the girls, and it also kind of joins them in a sorrow, and it joins them in a kind of mourning for this person who opened up to them. So, you know, the first part of the movie does not stick the landing, right? We don't believe that these girls are friends, but that doesn't mean that the main girl's struggle is not there, right? The creepy dad, the reason that they're moving here for whatever reason, the weird vibe with the brothers, right? Like
right.
The hyper masculinity thing that the father does.
The cult thing. Yeah.
There's a lot there that is already kind of percolating. The chemistry between the girls, I don't think it's there, but I think it definitely binds them together, the kid, what ends up happening to the kid at the end there. So I don't think it takes away from the focus of the girls. I think it's just something that was a very powerful moment for him and for, queer people who are watching it. But at the same time, it's the MacGuffin really that kind of binds them together for the pinnacle part of the end of the movie.
Well, and I think that's the unfortunate kind of thing about such a powerful message and kind of storyline being added here, that unfortunately it's going to be difficult to kind of strip that away from the movie and kind of take the movie for what it could have been without it.
Yeah.
Because I think the movie was effectively a failure other than for that storyline. So as a fan of the craft and wanting to see a group of witches kind of come into their power, and that is it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's a really good segue into the usage of powers in this movie. Dear God, so bad.
Yeah.
So bad.
To your earlier point, there's no like little flurries coming out. They really went the opposite direction
in the first film. These girls are not expert. The original craft movie, they're not expert witches. They are learning. They mess up. They go through the film learning things. And these girls right out of the gate know how to do pretty much everything once they get the main, the fourth girl into the film. Her name is, I'm being awful. Do you remember her name?
I don't, but she was great.
Yeah. So I liked her a lot too. I felt bad for her that she had to be in this movie. Yeah. I felt bad for her because I think with a better script, she did good. I liked her. I think it's like Lainey something. But then like the powers, you get like the little zaps and the aura and like there's the little wisps. I didn't like the freezing time thing.
Yeah.
I didn't like the freezing the space stuff. The movie is so serious. Like it's more of a drama than the original was. The original kind of plays way more with the original has drama in it.
Yeah.
But it has some horror elements in it as well. Like it has that blending of genre that was very, very effective in the 90s.
I disagree with you there too. I don't think this movie was that serious. I think they were trying to take the piss out of it with that friend who was always like making the jokes and stuff like that.
That is their way of getting away with how self-serious the storyline takes itself. Like the storyline of the girls takes itself so serious that they think they can get away with it by having this like humorous character that can just kind of be a little slapstick and just introduce like just kind of, oh, we're a little silly. I don't know. It just doesn't work.
I know. And I would be remiss if I did not publicly say this, but the moment where they're casting their first spell on the boy and they pick a used condom out of the garbage can and they mix it in a bong, who and why? Like who said that's it and why? That was to me horrible.
That to me very much encapsulated, I think, what people perceive needs to be on screen for teenagers of today to potentially like watch and get engaged and feel like something is shocking. Like, and like you need to constantly kind of make these really
outlandish decisions,
like stuff. Like it's just like it at one point, and this kind of connects to a conversation you and I have had about something else, like other requels or legacy or reboots rather. At one point, I started to feel like this movie is so different to The Craft, aside from needing, three witches or whatever. I think with a few tweaks, the fact that it has a true villain in the David Duchovny character and it introduces this warlock, the pseudo warlock, hyper masculine cult storyline that is underdeveloped, beyond underdeveloped. You never learn anything about that.
Yeah.
A different movie that maybe did not feel shackled to be a sequel to The Craft, could have actually like just not called itself The Craft, because this is modern Hollywood wanting to co-opt the popularity of the movie The Craft.
Right.
They take something that in no way, shape, or form truly reminds you of it. Other than the fact that it's three girls in a school, new girl comes to town and they become witches. And there's a boys situation. Other than that, it's not The Craft. You can switch that around, and then they use the same book, and there's the logo, and they mention Manon. You remove all of that, introduce more of the storyline having to do with the father, and really flesh out the character of Timmy. Maybe even get rid of one of the girls and swap in Timmy's character. You know what I mean? Maybe later in the film, maybe you find out that was kind of what his connection was to stuff. But this movie does not need to be connected to The Craft, regardless of the little stinger at the end of the film and that little secret. And
I will say I didn't hate it. I really didn't. I'm not going to watch it again. I'm not going to own it. Like, this is a one and done deal. I will say, half of it was good, half of it was bad. I give it a little bit more grace because I did enjoy. I was not expecting that real solid moment in the movie, and maybe I give it grace because of that. I will say, as my last statement on the movie, the defeat of Mulder at the end there, I mean, talk about horrible. I know you have a big thing with Hocus Pocus 2 and the graveyard scene and the big moon. It reminded me a little bit of that, of like this contrived forest. It just was so bad. And like they're burning him and he doesn't even scream. Like, there's not even a moment where you're like, oh, he's suffering. Like, it just cuts to black and you're like, oh, yes, he's dead.
I was confused if this was even the end of the movie. I was like, oh, did he teleport out of the fire?
Nope.
It wasn't until like the scene cut to the next scene where it's the end of the movie already that I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, that didn't even seem like he was being defeated.
Absolutely.
So confusing. I think this script was sitting around in a lot of different development cycles. And I think at one point they wanted it to be a full reboot. And then at one point they wanted it instead to be like a pseudo legacy sequel. So they infuse bits and pieces of the storyline of The Craft. And, very quickly, we'll just throw this out there. The main character in the film, you find out that she is Nancy from the original movie's daughter. You get a little bit of the fact that David Duchovny's character knew that Nancy was her mother. It potentially, I saw some people online thinking that it potentially hinted that the father took Nancy's power. Basically it introduces all this kind of stuff and it never explains anything
with it, right?
So it's completely inconsequential to any of it.
Well, he probably finds out because he filed her adoption papers. I mean, it literally is that.
Well, but he already had powers. Like he's like a warlock.
Sure, but he knew who she was, is what I'm saying. At that point, that's when she knew.
Well, so this is explained so little that at that point, I started to wonder, wait, did he meet the mom specifically to get Nancy's daughter in his life to then somehow take her powers because he knows that Nancy's powers are in her? And that's never stated.
Right.
That's not even really like implied. That's more of like the movie is not giving you anything. So I start to create my own implications by what it's giving me.
Which The Craft one never, I mean, that was never a thing, right? They left everything on the field with that one. So,
right. So
not for everybody, maybe not for us.
So it's a total not recommend for me.
Okay.
I'm gonna recommend, if you enjoy The Craft, do not watch The Craft Legacy. If you're in the mood to maybe watch something that makes you upset because it's calling itself The Craft, definitely watch this. Main actress in the film does a fantastic job. Michelle Monaghan, I always love her. She brings that mom energy that I like, the hot mom energy that I'm a big fan of. Nicholas Galzatine as Timmy, great job.
Stand out.
And I know you'll like this. I I didn't like Red, White, and Royal Blue. I'm willing to revisit it for you at some point. Willing to revisit it. He's recently been cast as He-Man for Amazon Studios.
Interesting.
And I have to say, his character in this film and those scenes and the scenes he was involved in actually make me look forward to seeing him as what he potentially may bring to He-Man.
He's not the standout for me in Red, White, and Royal Blue. Taylor Zakar, whatever his name is, for me is the heart of the film. But I didn't know he could act like this. And if you take nothing away from my review of The Craft Legacy, is that moment with him really is top tier.
All right. So that is The Craft and The Craft Legacy. And as always, I think we want to kind of get this out there quick. What is have you been watching anything this week?
I will say, and it's a short review, I watched Inside Out 2, and I was not a fan of the first one. I'm not a fan of the second one. I don't know how it made that much money. I just think that those movies are just not good. And anxiety is a major character in this one, the emotion anxiety and the way they designed her and everything that I knew about it before I saw the movie. I thought, love it, love it, love it. Was not expecting her to be the antagonist of the movie. Not sure I loved anxiety being the villain in the movie. There's just a lot of things in it that I didn't enjoy. So do not recommend. But I know I'm in the minority in that. I know that the world has moved on beyond, what Pixar used to be. It's just not for me. Okay.
Inside Out 2. Glowing review-ish from Jerry.
No, do not watch.
I thought you were saying that you liked it. You just didn't like that anxiety was the lead.
No. I don't care for either one of those movies. I really don't. No.
Got you.
Yeah.
So I've been watching again. I watched it for a second time. The new Salem's Lot. On Max. It's a Max original, and we are planning a Salem's Lot episode. We're still hashing that one out, but the new one on Max, I watched it a week ago. I loved it. Loved it so much I watched it again.
Nice.
I'm gonna definitely talk more in depth on that once we do an episode. But highly
cool.
Wait for our show, or go watch it now so you know what we're talking about, because we don't do spoiler alerts. We just jump right into them.
Yep.
But this has been episode 3. This is Midnight Snacks. We will see you next time.
Bye-bye, guys.